Hello everyone, Nathan Winters here with the Wyoming Family Alliance, coming to you with an end of the session review of the 2026 legislative season. This was a lively session, a lively 4 weeks, but I want to start by sharing with you some of the victories we experienced. There were 2 bills that came through the process that are of deep importance for future Wyoming boys and girls. And I say future because they're not yet born. They may still be in the womb, but these are our future neighbors and our future friends. And these bills acknowledge their human dignity in the womb. The first bill is House Bill 3, which is designed to protect Wyoming pregnancy resource centers. The bill, which was amended a little in the process, came out in really good shape. But what I was so thankful for is that in the legislative hearings, the opportunity opened up for so many in the legislature and in the Wyoming public to hear the testimony of many of these who lead or serve in these programs in their communities. It was important because the work done by pregnancy resource centers all across the state is of vast importance in their local communities. In testimony, it emerged that several of these centers have faced threats over the past few years. But I also want to share one of the blessings that came out in testimony as well. One lady who showed up with a lot of questions and frankly a lot of fear to the Life Choice Pregnancy Resource Center in Cheyenne was able to explain the genuine, heartfelt, and ultimately life-changing care she received through their free ultrasounds. She also was so thankful and expressed all the different ways in which they had counseled her during that time. I want to stop for a moment and just say, wherever you are in our state, find out if there's a pregnancy resource center near you and see how you can help. If you can't find one, call us here at Wyoming Family Alliance and one of our team would love to help you get in touch with one of these important groups. Well, back to House Bill 3. It successfully passed. It was signed by the governor on March the 6th, and it will go into law this year. The second victory was House Bill 126, the Human Heartbeat Act. And this bill was designed specifically to address the issues raised by the recent Supreme Court decision here in Wyoming called the Johnson decision. Now, I need to give a little bit of backstory here. In 2022, legislation was passed that would have restricted abortion in Wyoming, rightfully so. In that legislation, Part A kept the laws we had on the books up to that point in place. But then it said that if Part B were enacted, Part A would no longer be necessary and therefore would be repealed. Then Part B simply said that if the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the infamous decision called Roe v. Wade, Wyoming would restrict abortion to just a few circumstances. Well, as the decision was released in January, the Wyoming Supreme Court showed that they had overturned the legislation in a very odd way. They overturned Part B, but not Part A. They let that stand. Now, what that means is that not only was the legislation meant to protect babies taken down, but all of the pro-life legislation to that point that had been passed over the previous decades was repealed, making Wyoming no better than some of the worst offenders in this country, places like California and Wisconsin and New Jersey. So House Bill 126, the Human Heartbeat Act, is vitally important for our future citizens. It answers the Supreme Court's questions while protecting babies, as many as possible in the future. Now, that doesn't mean that the issue is over. The abortion industry will likely attack the legislation as soon as they can. But we believe that this bill will address the issues so that Wyoming will become a safe place for the unborn once again. Now, there were a couple of bills that almost made it that are of vital importance, and we will have to pick up again next year. The first of these is House Bill 10. This was a bill that addresses sexually explicit materials in the library. Now, we have been dealing with this issue for several years in a row. And during this session, there was a lot of testimony received, and it was wonderful to see how many came out in support of the legislation. Now, I've explained this bill in the past, so I won't go into all of the details, but I do want to take this moment as a teachable moment to address something that to me is frankly heartbreaking. In the Senate subcommittee, there was testimony from a librarian who introduced herself as a Christian and as someone who grew up in a pastor's home. But then she proceeded to argue against the bill as though it abused the First Amendment and could somehow be misused against the Bible itself. Shortly after that, a man who called himself a pastor, although come to find out later, he's not the pastor of anything anyone would normally call a church. He tried to make the claim that the Bible was itself pornographic somehow and could be taken out of libraries if this bill was passed. It saddened me so much, I came back here to my office to do some extra research, and I wound up writing about 3.5 pages addressing this issue. Now, mind you, one could write much more on this subject. Even with the limited time in the midst of an intense session, I still was able to put together something that I believe helps clarify the arguments that these folks were using against the Word of God. And I can say that they were, at best, inauthentic. That's charitable. They were simply not true. Now, I could only find about 4 instances where the Bible had been removed from libraries. And in every case that at least I could find, it didn't take long for those instances to be overturned and the Bible returned to libraries, often within the space of a month. I want to give you just a few details of the summary because I just want to make this abundantly clear about the Bible. At the tail end of what I wrote, it says, the Bible is categorically different from the graphic imagery and language of concern to families in our state. The erotic content of modern graphic novels, or words that describe actual sexual acts in a moment-by-moment way, the actual physical acts or self or mutual sexual stimulation, is emphatically different from biblical literature. The Bible would not be mistaken for the modern hypersexualized content in question. The argument that the Bible should be restricted from kids is unserious and has been rejected as little more than an advocacy tactic to confuse those with little familiarity with the Scriptures. To phrase this carefully, but bluntly, anyone using what Aristotle would have called the koine estasis, or what the Romans called the sensus communis, what you and I call common sense, anyone with common sense would be hard-pressed to find in the long 3,400-year history since the first books of the Bible were written, when people would have slipped off, Bible in hand, for erotic stimulation. Folks, when you run into these kind of arguments that people raise up, these would be called false speculations and false arguments in 2 Corinthians. My prayer is that men and women would stand up with kindness and grace, but also with firmness and conviction, and say, listen, that is an unserious argument, and really it has no place in the debate here in Wyoming. Now, thankfully, most of that was just outright dismissed. But sadly, the bill didn't make it through. I'll explain why here in just a moment. Because there's another bill I want to share with you as well that didn't quite make it all the way through the process. That bill was House Bill 117. It was entitled the Stop Harm, Empower Women with Informed Notices Bill. It's known better by its acronym, She Wins. It's literally designed to ensure that a woman is protected from being coerced into having an abortion, and it ensures that the information that is necessary before you take dangerous chemical abortion drugs is actually given to the lady in question. And sadly, these 2 bills were stopped by a deadline that was in the complete control of Senate leadership. Now, for those who are familiar with the legislative process, they know how people use these deadlines to let bills die that they don't like. And sadly, on the last day of the deadline, some in the Senate leadership recessed on purpose for hours, while vital legislation such as these 2 waited to be heard. But that just means that we will be back next year, carrying forward these important issues. But I also want to say that I was amazed and thankful that so many of you took advantage of the resources that Wyoming Family Alliance put together for you, either on our main website, wyomingfamily.org, or at the legislatively focused website, wyofambilltracker.com. Now, we're about to enter a busy election year, and it's about to start up with earnest. And so Wyoming Family Alliance will be here with you, informing you on the issues as we defend life, advance liberty, and preserve freedom for Wyoming families. I look forward to seeing you next time as we have many more videos coming up through this interim season and through the election season as well. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.